Hey, I'm Patrick, and today on the Daily Devo, we're going to be talking about precious faith. Have you ever thought about the importance of last words? Have you ever thought about what your last words would be if you could choose them? A little over a decade ago, a professor at a college was diagnosed with terminal cancer. He recognized that he didn't have much time, and so he began to wonder, what would he say if he could give his last lecture? And so he did. He invited people, a crowd, so much so that it was standing room only came, and he gave what he thought was his last lecture. It was turned into a book and became a New York Times best seller. But imagine if a guy that spent every moment of every day for 4 years with Jesus could share some of his last words with us. Imagine if a guy who watched Jesus walk on water. Imagine if a guy who watched Jesus raise dead people. Imagine if a guy who heard Jesus teach with power and authority could give us some of his last words. What would he say? What advice would he give us? Well, we don't have to wonder, because Peter wrote 2 Peter. It's in the Bible. It's his last lecture. Right in verse 14 of chapter 1, he tells us that he knows he's going to die soon. So over the next month, we're going to be digging into chapter 1 and unpacking some of the truths of Peter's last lecture. We'll jump in today in verse 1. Peter writes this. He said, "This letter is from Simon Peter, a slave and apostle of Jesus Christ. I am writing to you who share the same precious faith we have." I think if we could hear Peter say those words, not just writing them, but say those words, he would emphasize the word precious. Precious faith. Why was it so precious to Peter? Because remember, Peter saw Jesus beaten. Peter saw Jesus drug out to Golgotha. Peter saw Jesus nailed to the cross. Peter saw Jesus die. Peter felt the hopelessness when Jesus was drug off the cross. And 3 days later, Peter felt the hope when he saw that tomb was empty and recognized that Jesus had power over sin and death. So today, as you think about this faith that you and I have, I want you to remember that this is a precious faith. If you're like me, sometimes we take it for granted. But hear Peter, this eyewitness to Jesus, saying, this isn't any faith. This is a precious faith.